It's such a pleasure to be here, and I hope that this is enlightening and uplifting for you, for every one of you. This is my second time back, so thank you, Helen. My first one was the upside of depression, and now we're doing a more positive topic, which is Ignite My Life and Set Me Free. We're going to be talking about sociosomatic dynamics. That's a body of knowledge that I have been developing. The Happiness Advantage by Sean Achor, and Supportive Ecosystems. Let's get right started. Oops. All right, so Helen went through a little bit of my background, but so these are my worldly credentials. But in the background, there was another journey happening. I tend to think of our lives as a journey where we're presented with various problems, and as we master them, we move on to other problems. For instance, a baby's first problem is how to get its hand to its mouth, and then it moves on to sitting, and then standing, and then walking. So these are all challenges that we face. This doesn't stop when we're adults, it continues on. And so that's the basis on which this work is being done. I had a spiritual epiphany or experience when I was about 13. And that led me to learn how to see energy patterns with a guy. His name was Jeff Kroc, and he studied from George Simon. Very, not very well known at all, but a very rare and beautiful gift, which I was able to develop for myself. I then went to Skidmore University without walls, and I did my thesis on counseling gifted and talented children using body awareness. I could already see that there was a relationship between our physiology and the challenges that we were facing. Fast forward, I have been involved with Rolfing. That is a also called structural integration. And what that does is it changes, uses the fascia, which is the connective tissue between muscles and muscles and bones. And by pushing on those, affects actual structural change in the body. So one of the pivotal books there was this book, The Protean Body. And in the Rolfing field, this has a pretty profound effect on your ability to function. Later, a little bit later, this book here is Your Body's Brilliant Design by Karen Gable, also talking about connective tissue or fascial release. I think you're going to see more of that coming down as we begin to understand it better. So sociosomatic dynamics is the interaction of the mind, body, and spirit. It's our ecosystem. And we don't really know that much about it, but we do know that there are basically three components. There's the mind, which is mindset, belief patterns, and the stories of our lives and how we frame things. The second is our body, our physiology, our biochemistry, and the energy patterns. So for instance, flight, fight, fright, or freeze. I'm sorry, it should be flight, fight, or freeze. Those are all physiological responses, and how we and we each adapt to those physiological responses differently. So, and a physiological response is actually a sequence of patterns and habits. Our spiritual nature or our spirituality is not often discussed certainly in the mental health world or even in the business world where I reside. Spirituality is a transcendent relationship with self, others, and a higher power. Now, I'll talk in a minute about the difference between religion and spirituality. But first, so spirituality is, let's say that religion is a container for developing one's spiritual nature. So your spiritual nature is your creativity, your imagination, your intention, It has to do with your purpose or your calling or what gives your life meaning. And it also includes intuition, gut sense, and coincidence. So in our society, we generally think that the mind, the conscious mind, runs our lives. We think, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I interpret the world. And this is, this is what's important to me. Actually, if you flip that, if you flip that and you make your spiritual nature the first step in governing your life, you get a tremendous release of energy. Our spiritual nature is incredibly powerful, much, much more powerful than the mind and the body. And it also is an organizing factor. It helps you put into perspective the things that are happening in your life and your physiology. So in sociosomatic dynamics, one of the things I always ask is, what's your goal? What's your priority? What's your relationship with God or a higher power? Because that tells me if that is something that the person is working with, and also whether how strong that is and how that can impact the change for an individual. So let's get really granular and talk about the sequence of steps that happen when you have a triggering event. So a triggering event is something that initiates a sequence of automatic thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and actions. And it can be internal or it can be external. So for instance, when you wake up in the morning, you initiate a sequence of events in order to prepare yourself for the day. So let's take the example of anxiety and excitement. Both of those physiological responses, that means biochemistry, muscular, and energy, are very, very similar in the body. So let's say in the first situation, somebody is worried about their spouse cheating on them. So that would really trigger an event. And their response is to have the biochemical, muscular, and energy patterns, which then signal the limbic system to have a response. The mind labels this anxiety, and then the mindset is engaged. That mindset is a sequence of processes or beliefs that contain or orchestrate the story. The story then unfolds. The sequence is automatic thoughts and feelings. From those thoughts and feelings, we filter what we think of as reality. We take action and change the environment. And then there's homeostasis. So in this client that I had she thought that her husband was cheating on her. And that would send her into anxiety all the way into a panic attack, to the point where she had to separate herself from the environment and go and take a break. She learned how to do grounding and anchoring. So she was able to detect the physiological response in her. And the beginnings of that anxiety, and she initiated grounding, which is to focus on one's internal state, or in their feet and their hands, and anchoring, which is to focus on the things around them. So she was shifting the emphasis from what was happening internally to what was happening around her. When she did this, she was able to disconnect the automatic sequence of thoughts and feelings, and she was able to regain her equilibrium and go back to her normal routine. It turns out that in her case, her husband was not cheating on her. He was, but subtle cues she had thought had caused this anxiety, and that was the story she told. She also found that there were other situations where she had anxiety attacks. And now that she could see that the anxiety attacks were physiological first, and that the story might be different, she was able to disconnect or stop that from happening. So let me stop here. So with excitement, I'm going to stop for questions in a minute. So with excitement, this starts with, again, an environmental trigger. There's a physiological response, very similar to anxiety. There's an emotional response. And then the mind labels this emotion as excitement. A mindset is engaged. The story unfolds. That shapes the thoughts and feelings and their perception of reality. A person takes action and changes the environment. So does anybody have any questions? Okay, going on. So mindset research has really increased in the last 5-10 years. A woman, Carol Dweck, I don't know if you all know her, but she wrote the book on mindset, and she identified the growth versus the fixed mindset. So this anxiety pattern, a pattern that keeps going and keeps happening, is more symbolic of a fixed mindset, whereas excitement and the opportunity to try new things is more of a growth mindset. From that research, Kelly McGonigal did the upside of stress. And one of the things that she did is she did a study where she had people who clean up hotel rooms, and she divided them in two. And one half, she told them that the work that they were doing was exercise and made them more healthy. And the other side, they didn't say anything. And then they measured their biometrics at the end of a certain period of time and found that the people who believed that it was exercise were in better shape and had lost weight, whereas the control had no change whatsoever. So spirituality is essential to life. It is, this was talked about by Lisa Miller. Here is her book, The Spiritual Child. This is this is a survey of all the research that has been done on spiritual nature and the effect of it on our behavior and our physiology. And what she basically says is that a personal relationship with a higher power that is loving and guiding is very protective of our health. So for instance, I mentioned before that a higher power can be nature. You could connect with God and whatever that means for you. You could connect to the universe. You could be involved in a religion that would help you develop your personal relationship with God. The spirituality operates outside of this sequence of automatic responses or mindsets. And so therefore it is guiding the individual. These sequence of automatic patterns are there to either help and assist you getting to your goals, or they can stop and prevent you. So in the example of excitement, obviously you would be excited and interested in those things that help you reach your goals or your purpose and calling, whereas the anxiety would stop you. So what gives your life meaning leads to happiness, and we're going to talk about happiness in a moment. So her research revealed that 40% that kids were 40% less likely to use and abuse substances. They were 60% less likely to be depressed as teens, and they were 80% less likely to have dangerous or unprotected sex. They were more likely to have positive markers for thriving and high levels of academic success. So what are the critical questions when we're thinking about how are we going to ignite our life and set us free? So the first is that we need to ask and have conversation with our spiritual nature. You might ask, so what's important to me? Or what's my purpose for living? Or what do I notice? What's that still small voice that's internal to me that's guiding me? And to begin to start listening and trying out or obeying some of those suggestions. This is the place where we will find love and meaning. The second part is to look at our automatic sociosomatic dynamics and ask, does it serve our calling? You know, in the example before, the excitement serves our calling, but the anxiety doesn't necessarily do. It doesn't necessarily. So how do we begin the journey? Well, let's take the next step and see. So the happiness advantage is something that Sean Achor coined, and he's a researcher. He's a business researcher, and he did a lot of research on the effect of success and happiness. And so one of the things he did was he posed the question, if I were to look and know everything about your external world, how closely could I predict your happiness? That was the question. Does anybody care to give a guess on what percentage of you could predict happiness by seeing what was happening in someone's external world? Okay. So it turns out that so he worked at Harvard, and he was studying Harvard students. And when people were asking about them, they said, you're crazy. People at Harvard have got to be happy. They've got a great college. They're on the road to success, and they've got beautiful surroundings and great food and all that. Well, it turns out that the answer was that only 10% of your external world is predictive of your happiness. That means that 90% of your 90% or your response to situations is much more predictive of your happiness. So in his research, he found that only 25% of job success is predicted by IQ. The other 75% was predicted by internal responses. So if you were able to see the inside of a person and predict their happiness, and you knew exactly what they were thinking, you could predict their happiness 90%. So positivity and optimism levels have a profound effect on your success. Social supports and ecosystem affect your success, and your ability to see stress as a challenge rather than a threat. That is the growth mindset, and is part of what Kelly here has talked about. So the current way that we think of success and happiness is that, and it's the way that we motivate ourselves in work, school, and in parenting. And this is the mindset that most of us or many of us operate on. If I work harder, I will be more successful. And when I am more successful, I will be happy. Now, if you've ever taken a kid to a toy store, you know that they are absolutely positive that if they get this toy right now, they'll be happy forevermore. And then half an hour after they get it home, they don't even look at it. So there's an example of how we think once we attain something, we're going to be happy. Actually, the reverse is true. But here's the thing: when you have this happiness as the goalpost, the future, if you successfully get the toy or the job or whatever, what you're doing is you're always pushing happiness further and further away. It's always in the future, but you never get to live it. So that's what Sean is saying, is that is having a profound effect on your ability to be successful. The truth of the matter is, and this is a shift in mindset, is that the brain works in the opposite order. You raise the happiness and you get more, and then you have success. So shifting our mindset, that's simple thing, to shift our mindset to say, I'm going to look for things that make me happy and feel good, and success will come, is very different, but it has a very different outcome. So here's what they found, that your brain on positive performs significantly better than negative, stressed, or neutral mindsets or feelings. The energy level rises, your creativity rises, and your intelligence rises. Because he's a researcher in the business space, he found that there were positive business outcomes, which are 31% more productive, 37% better at sales. And get this, doctors are 19% faster and better at coming up with the right diagnosis. You know, we are having a lot of burnout in the medical place. And just think of that. Just by having happy doctors, you get better diagnosis faster. So this applies not only in business and those sorts of things, but it applies to our lives as well. Some of the biochemistry that's happening when we have happiness is that there's a flood of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, and we feel happier. And that dopamine turns on all the learning centers in the brain. So there's a biochemical, a physical response to the happiness. So how do we cultivate this happighness advantage? And this is the foundation of our of growing and igniting our life and setting free from the negativity. So living in the gift, I'll tell you a story. I was at a church retreat and there was a woman complaining about how bad her husband is, and she was trying to decide whether to get divorced and what the impact might be on her daughter. And I took her aside and I shared my experience with my kids and how shifting from a negative point of view, negative mindset to a positive completely changed my children. And she was like, oh, okay. So 2 years later, we're back at the same retreat. I'm seeing this woman who is glowing about her husband and child, and I don't know who she is because I've long forgotten this conversation. And at the end of the retreat, she says, you know, that I pulled her aside, and she had changed this to be a concept called living in the gift. And she had taken this back to her husband, and she'd said, the gift, the pie is whatever it is, it's blueberry pie. And the piece that's missing of the pie is the sliver. And so what happens in life over and over again is people are focused on that sliver. How are we going to get that pie back? You know, we want that. I want that pie. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? And simply by shifting their perspectives and focusing on the gift, the wonderful things about each other, the things that you do for each other, the praise that you have. Simply by doing that, she completely, fundamentally changed her marriage, and she was happily married now. Her mother-in-law was also very negative. She also bought into this kind of a concept. She did pass from cancer, but on her tombstone is living in the gift. So her last days were a joy, and that's great. So now in the living in the gift, remember, praise is really, really important. Don't be a praise miser. Give praise more and more and more because it has a ripple effect. And I could say, looking back at my children's lives, that it was complimenting them every day, making a step to compliment them every day, no matter how small, for something that I really liked about them or that they did, fundamentally changed how our relationships, and they are very successful, wonderful children, if I might say so myself. So what do we do to cultivate happiness? So there's three. You're basically changing a habit. You're changing a mindset. You're changing physiological patterns and habits. So the first is to write down 3 new things you're grateful for 21 days. This changes the negativity habit, the habit of negativity, and your mind begins to scan the environment for positive things and experiences. The second is to journal about positive events, because this allows your mind, body, and spirit to relive it. Also, talking with your friends about positive events. That also helps you relive it. It also feeds your friends. The next is exercise. So exercise raises your energy level. A lot of people are suffering from depression in part because they're not moving around. They're not engaging their energy level. It also helps clear out stress, and it signals to your unconscious and your whole being that behaviors matter. The second is meditation. So meditation is an opportunity to quiet your mind, and with that, you're better able to connect with your spiritual nature. You know, our society is a culture of ADHD. We're all trying to do multitasking and do lots of things. And so when we meditate, we're able to focus our attention better. I teach grounding and anchoring. This is a way of disconnecting or disengaging the mental mindset and patterns that go off in our heads. And the last is to practice random acts of kindness. What this does is the act of giving is a very healing thing. And that's the importance of random acts of kindness. So that, okay. Any questions so far? Okay. Okay, so there's a supportive ecosystem. Our spirituality connects us to each other, a higher power that is loving and guiding. And so your support system amongst your friends and your colleagues has the ability to feed back to you the happiness and the praise that you have given out. We have, you know, there's people have good days and bad days, and for you to be comforting and helpful, that's a way that you're supporting and strengthening your ecosystem. Living in the gift and the happiness advantage creates the rules for engagement in your ecosystem. Just like this woman who brought this back to her family, she set new rules for her ecosystem, and the effect was wonderful. Her husband was teaching her daughter sight reading and playing music with her, and she was happier. So an ecosystem has diverse needs, strengths, and purposes. So even in ourselves, we have the mind, body, and spirit components of our ecosystem. So you want to encourage the diversity. You may not agree with everybody, but to still focus on what you like about them keeps that diversity, that differing of opinion, and it strengthens your resilience as an ecosystem and within an ecosystem. So, and the sociosomatic dynamics, that helps you assess and retool your habits and your mindset so it aligns with a healthy ecosystem. We are loved and we have purpose and meaning as an ecosystem. So not only do you have a purpose or a calling in your life, but your ecosystem does too. So it's important to support that. That gives you the foundation to launch into new and interesting areas of your life. So thank you for joining me and us.